Hey everyone, Frangella here, back with the second half of our glass modeling, getting labels on an animation tutorial. So in the first part of this tutorial, we talked about modeling these glasses and adding some color correction in Photoshop to get a really nice still image and throwing some labels on the front and back and getting nice refraction. And my idea for the second half was to animate this using dynamics and a moving camera. So that was the original idea, but that's not too complicated, and I wanted to make this a little harder and add some extra tips. So I want to show you guys some stuff I cooked up for this one because I'm excited about this. So here's the final file we'll work towards in Cinema 4D, and I'll play this, and it has the dynamics. The glasses are rolling down the hill. They'll reflect and get the refraction around. But I want to show you guys some other stuff I came up with to make this even more interesting. If I get out of my camera view and pull out here and play this, check this out. They're moving and animating, and when this glass hits, we get this cool synced camera bump. And after we do that, we'll render it out and bring it into After Effects. And again, we'll talk about adding our video color correction like we would and render this out. But again, I want to go even further, so we'll talk about if we end this in Cinema 4D and render it out, that's fine. But we'll talk about bringing it into After Effects and doing some cool stuff, like sending parts and information from Cinema 4D over to After Effects so we can get 2D images linked into our scene, as well as setting up an object buffer if we wanted to have something behind here to have partial transparency of a 2D image, using a track mat in After Effects with partial transparency sent over from Cinema 4D using that same Cineware layer, because all this connection between Cinema 4D and After Effects has been one of my favorite things lately, and you can do so much cool stuff with it. So we'll still do all the Cinema 4D stuff, we'll still do our color correction in After Effects, but we'll take a couple steps further and I'll show you some other cool things you can do with sending stuff back and forth between After Effects. So I'm really excited about this one. Let's just get right into it. Again, this is our scene in Cinema 4D. We're going to work towards this. We'll have the camera moving, those banging into each other, this rolling around. So this is where we left off with part one of our glasses. They're rendered and they're not set up with dynamics yet, so let's start to add this. So this part will be if you're in the full studio version that allows dynamics. So if you're in Cinema 4D Lite, this isn't something that's in it, but if you have studio and can do dynamics, dynamics is one of the most fun things you can do with Cinema 4D. So let's just get right to it. I have my glass and my glass instance, and I'm just going to reorganize my scene in order just to clean it up a bit for me. So I have my glass instance. I'm going to grab both of those, right click and go to Simulation Rigid Body. And then for our floor plane, I'm going to right click Simulation Collider Body. And then the one thing I want to make sure of is I want to zoom in here and make sure that they're not passing through this floor and that they're not intersecting with each other, because that would cause problems because there's no way to have physics of dynamics moving around accurately with objects overlapping. So I'll just move this out to start and get back in my camera view, Shift F to go to the beginning, and I'll play. And it's all gonna freak out. And if I look outside of my camera view and just zoom way out and play, everything just kind of quickly falls. So there's a problem we have. And that's because we have this plane and we have this bend on it, and it would happen the same way if you had the plane with splines, because this dynamics tag for the plane under collision is set to shape automatic, and this is going to default it to render quickly but not taking all the geometry. So what we want to do is set that to static mesh, and then if we play, they're just going to drop and fall, and that's what we want. So let's get this glass in the back up the hill a bit and kind of position it into place. So I'm going to go into 4 views and kind of move it into place behind this one on the top of our little hill here, rotate it into place, and just get it in an interesting spot where it's kind of behind this one and it will run into it. So I'll get back into my main view, pop back into my camera, press play, and let's see what happens. Alright, so we're getting our dynamics. You don't have enough scene information to really see what happens. I'm just going to change this default on the right side 90 frames to something like 250 and press enter, and then drag out our work area to 250 and then go back to the beginning and play again and check this out. So this will give us enough information and timeline to see our dynamics happening, make some decisions, move stuff around, and that's a good start. I don't mind that too much. I might move this over a bit. And what we'll want to start playing with in a minute after we set up our camera is under the tags, the bounce and friction of each, because that's going to control how much they move when they clank into each other and how much they stand still. And we might want that different for both of them and different for maybe just one. So what I'm going to do to get a little bit of camera movement is I have my camera, I'm going to go into my top view, and rather than animate the camera, I'm going to create object null, and I'm going to position that at about the front top of our glass. And then I'm going to parent the camera to that. And what that's going to allow me to do is just a little more control over my camera. If I want to grab this null, which I'll call camera null, now I can rotate that and get this nice, smooth, cinematic orbit. And I can move it a little if I want and maybe position it in and out as I need to. Just a different option to control your camera. So what I'm going to do is figure, as this animation is playing, grab this null, and maybe we'll start over here on the side. And I'm going to, for the null object, set position and rotation keyframe. So I'll turn off scale and parameters and just get keyframe, and then go ahead like 200 frames later in our animation, so we can even play, see what happens with our dynamics, get to a good spot where they start to stop. And then I'm going to rotate my null around and maybe pull it away a little, set another keyframe, and I can see that my sweep is getting a little cut off, which is fine. I can grab my plane and set the width segments up. They're just a lot bigger, and just make sure that covers up. And same thing with the top, maybe just put that high enough just to cover up our scene. So again, I'll just play, and already that's looking like pretty good camera movement. Maybe just at the beginning, again, I'd grab my null, kind of reposition it, bring it in a little. Gonna make creative decisions of where this camera is swinging. Remember to press keyframe, Shift F to go to the beginning, and then just play again. And pretty quickly, some nice little cinematic camera movement to go along with our nice dynamics movement. So what I want to do now is start playing with those dynamics a bit, because this is fine. I like this. It's going pretty interesting, and I like how this one is kind of rolling around. But it's interesting to see and do little tests of different ways to do this. So if I grab both of my glass objects and grab the tag, say I turn bounce up to like 100 and friction up to 0, this is going to affect both of them. And then if I go to the beginning, play, check this out, they're gonna really fly out of frame because their bounce is way up, and that's a pretty cool frame, I might say. Maybe this is right before, you know, a big scene and our glasses are about to come together, and here it comes towards the camera, and cut. That's pretty cool. It's not realistic, but it's good to test this stuff out. And if I put bounce at 0 and friction at 100 and play, we're gonna see that they don't move really much, and we get a really different animation. It doesn't even roll around at all. So what's cool, these are glasses, and they would have the same properties as we could grab them separately. And let's say on the main glass, I want this to stay in my main point of my shot at the end and not move around too much. So I could bounce like 25, friction at 75, and then do the opposite for the instance. So 75, 25. And it's not going to be as realistic, but you know, if we're setting up 3D cameras and 3D animation scenes, maybe that's okay, and you can cheat it a little. And I'll play, and then I'm going to get, you know, this one is going to bounce a little and stay, and they roll around a bit, and I get this nice end shot. And maybe I'll turn up the bounce on the main one just a little. And what's nice about these dynamics is I have no keyframes. I'm just kind of bouncing this around based on what the dynamics properties. So let's look at that. That's nice. We get a nice little clank. So let's look at our camera. Maybe I'll grab that camera null and just bring it in a little now that I see my final shot, just to get a nice shot for my end part. So again, update that keyframe, go back to the beginning, rotate a little more, and I can always push this back and kind of make adjustments about more camera movement. Play, and that's looking pretty good. I like this. We have our dynamics working, our cameras moving. We could really stop there, but I wanted to add some things, like I said, and make this more interesting and kind of push it even further than just basic dynamics, basic camera movement. So my idea with this is I wanted to connect our camera somehow to this glass to have it kind of bump when it hits the other glass. My idea was that I could grab this null and make it a child of the glass, but what we need to do first is, because this is a lathe, and if we drop this null in here, it's gonna break everything. We need to take this glass and press C to make it editable, and then it's just one object now. And then we can grab our camera null, make it a child of that, and if I back up and play, it's going to be a little further, so we'll have to adjust things a bit. So again, I'm just going to grab my null, and on my keyframes, kind of bring this back in just because doing that took it off a little, and that's no big deal. And our last keyframe, again, just bring it back in to fix our final shot that we had that we liked. Keyframe again. And what you can see is happening is it looks like there's a little jolt with the background, but if we get out of our camera view and take a look at this, check out what this has done. We have our scene playing out, and then when this hits, the camera has a little bump as it's panning around that is choreographed with when the glasses clink based on the dynamics, and I thought that was pretty cool. So what's neat about this is that if we changed our dynamics even just on our glasses, let's say they really have a lot of bounce and have no friction. If we play this again, this is all going to be synced together just because of this parent-child relationship. So look at that camera bump. That got huge. And if we look at that in our view, it's really going to get bouncing. So that's pretty cool. We can coordinate our camera along with our dynamics and kind of have additional animation of our camera while it's moving, have it react to the dynamics. So I'm just going to go ahead and fix those dynamics instances back to what I had them, 75, 25, and just play and make sure I get my scene back. And now we're back to our original animation with the dynamics happening and rolling down the hill, and we've added this cool little camera bump. And if we come out of the camera, because this camera is a child of this glass and there's an instance of it, we can see that there's actually a copy of the camera rolling down the hill and kind of spinning with it, which we can't access because it's a child of an instance and it doesn't exist anywhere. But what we could do is if we just duplicate this camera and get in our views and move it into here, kind of inside of the glass. Let's say that this is just rotating it into the glass, and then make this a child of the instance and back up and look through this B camera view. Check this out. If we play, we kind of have like a GoPro view of what's happening in our dynamic scene. So that can be a really cool thing to show when you're doing dynamic simulation in 3D. And all I'd have to do to see a different view is rotate that camera around, because it's all connected with the dynamics. Just move it around, press play, and we're going to get a totally different view of what's going on. So that's kind of crazy. We're seeing these things clanking from the view of the glass, and we can render that out separately and have different views and have a whole cutscene of this. So it's a pretty cool little technique, and you could do a lot with it by just making objects editable and then parenting our null and camera to stuff with dynamics. So now that we have our animation, we could add a title in Cinema 4D if we wanted and kind of get ready to render this out. But I'm going to save the title for After Effects just to show how we can connect and coordinate some of these tags with After Effects. When we're rendering this out, there's a lot going on in this scene. There's dynamics, there's glass, and all that's going to take more time to render. So if we're on the physical render, we're really going to want to pay attention to this stuff and grab our physical render and maybe make it low, and if we have motion blur, even turn that down to like 2 maybe, or maybe just not use it at all because that's going to take more time. And with our anti-aliasing, if we don't have global illumination on, it would be a good idea to put it on gauge. It can cause problems sometimes, but it saves a lot on render time, and if you're not having light bouncing around and there's not a lot of light reflections, it can definitely help. And these are glasses, so one thing we could even put on is, if you want to get really crazy, is we could turn on caustics, and on our lights, we could change them to spotlight or leave them as omnidirectional and turn on caustics, have it shoot actual photons, say like 10,000 with more or less energy. And what this would do is actually mimic caustics in real life, which creates those extra reflections and shadows when light is passing through glass and kind of gets extra colored reflections. But again, this is one thing that really blows up render time. So for still images, if you were doing the last tutorial, maybe it's something you could add, and caustics can be a fun thing to play around with, but it's a lot of render time and it's probably not worth it for animation. First example of getting this out, we could set all this up, make sure to save it. I like doing TIFF or PNG sequences if we're going straight out of Cinema 4D into After Effects, just because then you can do frames partially at a time and you don't have to do the whole video. You can do it a couple hours here and there. So we're fully rendering this out, set all this up, set save, hit Shift R and let it run. But since I already rendered this out, I'll just hop into After Effects and show this first pass of, if we're just adding basic color correction, what we can do is just double click on project to import our PNG or TIFF sequence. So here's my whole sequence of the full 250 frames that I rendered out. Make sure it's the TIFF sequence, click OK, drag this into a new composition. Here's our video as it was rendered out. So if we wanted to add color correction, we could do this a couple ways. What we could do, because we already did this in Photoshop, double click again, find our Photoshop file, bring it in as composition, retain layer sizes, and open that one up, and we can see we have all of our curves layers that we made that have been brought in here. So we could just copy those and paste those, and then we have our color correction straight from Photoshop as we already did it, which is cool. If I press 0 to render, it's all going to be set up how we had it. Now if you didn't do that in Photoshop, that's fine. We could quickly do this in After Effects. We just do layer, new, adjustment layer, make After Effects curves. So I'll just grab curves on this first adjustment layer, push the shadows a bit and brighten up the dark spots a bit, and then I could just duplicate that and really bring up and soften the white areas over here, and then just grab an ellipse or a rectangle to make a mask to keep it over here. Press F to feather. And then I'm gonna grab another curves layer on top of all of this, M twice to invert that mask, and this is how I'll get that reddish tint. So I'll just reset, go to red, and just push that a little more, and I could even move this mask from the other part around. Kind of do the same thing we did in Photoshop. And then we have our reddish tint. We've quickly added some adjustment layers to brighten this thing up, give it some tint. Same thing as Photoshop. We could have a title and have it come in After Effects and have it fade in or something, or move in. That could be it. This is totally fine if this is where we stop. But we're already watching this video, and I already got you hooked with our new ideas. If we bring the Cinema 4D file straight into After Effects, which are these cool linking things that I was talking about a couple minutes ago at the beginning of the video. So if we go back to Cinema 4D and save this file in After Effects, if you're on Creative Cloud, I can just grab the Cinema 4D file that we had and bring it straight into After Effects, and then I can make a new composition, and then we could do the same thing of adding our color correction and change this to standard final and render this whole thing out. Some things we could add before that, so I'll just back up and undo those couple steps, is if we set some things up in Cinema 4D, we can send them over to After Effects and kind of sync this whole thing, which can be really cool. So one example is if we wanted to put a title in here like I had in this example in After Effects and have it sync to the camera from Cinema 4D, what we could do is create a null, create object, null, and we'll just move it in this scene where I want it to be. So I'll just look in my overhead view and just put it kind of right in the middle of it there. And what I'm going to do to send it to After Effects is right-click Cinema 4D tags, external compositing, and what this will do is send this as a null to After Effects. So again, I'm going to save this file. So now in After Effects, because I didn't already make a composition of this and there's no connection yet, I'm just going to delete this version of that and then just re-import that Cinema 4D file, and again, make a new composition of it. And now that we set up that null with external compositing in Cinema 4D, I can, in my Cineware layer on this file, extract my Cinema 4D scene data. What that's going to do is bring in the two cameras that I had and my lights and that null that you can see down here. So I don't need the lights, I can delete those, and I don't need that second camera. But now what I can do is if I make something like text, we'll just do that same dynamics, not dynamics, one more time, and maybe exclamation point because this is so exciting, and just scale that up a bit, and I can make that a 3D layer, and it's going to kind of go randomly in my scene based on where this camera is, and I can grab that text layer and hold shift to parent and move it to the null and scale it down a bit just to make sure this comes out right. And now if I RAM preview, now I have a 2D object in After Effects sitting and linking in my 3D scene from Cinema 4D by just adding that one little null and a tag. And you could make titles in Cinema 4D, but this is just a really cool thing you could do because maybe you want 2D text and you want to be able to use animators, or say we had our same old trusty Blackhawks logo that we could hold option, that we could bring into our scene and do the same thing, make it a 3D layer, bring it into our scene, rotate it because we were using it for something different last time, and again, just shift parent that to the null, rotate it again, I guess. And then we could have something else in here just as quick in our scene. Again, if we just preview, because it's already cached the Cinema 4D layer, look at how quickly, look how cool that already is. We have our pint glasses scene, we added our dynamics, we got our camera clank, And in addition to that, we have Blackhawks logo. So it's like marriage, pint glasses, Blackhawks, Stanley Cup, hockey, all at once, all, in just a couple minutes. So that's one little tip. I want to show you another one in that same vein of the After Effects Cinema 4D connections. This was a null, again, with an external compositing tag. If we wanted to set up something like this and drop it behind this glass and get some transparency, or if we just had an object in Cinema 4D and we wanted to put something in 2D behind it, like product image or something, one other trick we can do is on any of these assets, we can make an object buffer and then render that out. So I'll right click Cinema 4D tag compositing and then go over to object buffer, enable, and you can have up to 12 of these, so you could have a bunch of objects with passes sending these to use for track mats. And then in my render settings, I'm going to go to Multipass, enable that, right click, and towards the top, object buffer, and I'll save this, and it's going to update it in After Effects. And what I could do now is this other little part for Multipass workflow allows us to send different render passes over to After Effects and kind of edit things separately. So if I had this on standard final, and I'll just put this at a lower resolution, it might take a bit, but it will render out our scene from Cinema 4D into After Effects and enable this multipass option. And what we can do is, because we set up that multipass separately, we can click Define Multipass, add image layers, and it's the same if you're on standard final or standard draft. It'll just give you different resolution quality, which you might want to change while you're working in After Effects anyway. But back down here, we click Add image layer, and it's going to add just that object buffer. So that object buffer layer might take a second to render, but after it does, you can see it comes in as what looks like a track mat. And because it's a transparent material in Cinema 4D, we get transparency into this. So what we can use this for is if I unsolo this layer, and I'll switch back to my text instead of the Blackhawks logo because it's just getting kind of silly now. If I put that above either of those layers and set it to Luma inverted track mat and turn back on my original Cinema 4D layer, and I'll just change it to standard draft so it renders a little quicker while I'm working. What I can do with this object buffer layer is use that as a track mat for other layers. And because it's a transparent material, we get partial transparency. And because this is in After Effects, I can grab that object buffer layer and I can always add something like brightness contrast over here to just bump up the contrast and brightness a bit, and it's going to block out more of that. So if I look at my text layer, now I can move this text behind it, and it's partially transparent, and it's linking in my scene in After Effects from Cinema 4D, from sending that information over. So sending over these object buffers and these nulls can be incredibly useful. We could do this text in Cinema 4D, but this could be anything. Like I said, this could be Blackhawks logo for whatever reason if we wanted that to be behind here. Or this could be a piece of stock footage or something, and you can put it behind the glasses and block it out. Or just knowing that you can shift parent stuff to nulls in After Effects like lights, and there's a lot of plugins where you can also point things to lights. And just to illustrate this, I set up two little quick examples using optical flares and particular, which are really awesome plugins. So if we had optical flares, I just copied my whole scene. We could link a light to that, and I have a whole tutorial about this process, so check that one out if you want to know more about the sort of Cinema 4D to After Effects optical flares. So if we link that light, and I'll just turn this down, we can see that that's linking with our 3D scene, which is pretty awesome. And if we had particular, we can also send the particle emitter to a light. So if we take a look at this, and I'll just take the opacity of this down again, and if we play, that's all linking with our 3D scene. So we could have a whole 3D scene and a lot of stuff going on, and then without having to output a separate After Effects file like you used to have to, be able to just send this into Cineware, set up object buffers to composite footage elements, plugins behind objects, link them to nulls from Cinema 4D, and connect these two programs using some of these tags and the new Cineware in really cool ways. So this was a really fun one to put together. If we take a look at our 3D scene and some of the stuff we went over of the dynamics, but also linking cameras to dynamics and all the Cineware stuff, hopefully you got a lot out of it, and it kind of stepped up the level of stuff you can do beyond just the simple dynamics. So thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe on YouTube/Sean Frangella or Vimeo/Sean Frangella, and check out my Facebook page, facebook.com/Vitale, Vitale, and keep up with the videos. Let me know if you're looking for a tutorial about anything else, and as always, thanks for watching. I hope you learned a lot, and I will see you and talk about more of the stuff on the next video. Clank.